Hello, this is my meeting to analysis vlog. I'm just getting the business card of the woman who I met with. Her name is Tracy Thorne. She's the director at the Department of Youth and Community Development, specifically in vulnerable and special needs youth, focusing on runaway and homeless youth in all different types of areas around New York. And I had an hour-long meeting with her today at their office on Lafayette Street, the 22nd floor. And we had a really good discussion. I think it went really well. The office building was kind of intimidating. I had to go through like a security check. But I got up there and she was really nice and really knowledgeable, and she gave me some handouts with information on their services and other things they offer and what she does specifically and some things she's implemented while she's been there. And so one thing she said that they're doing that's really been working is a task force specifically for homeless youth. And I know Portland does a similar thing like that. So that's something we're doing in the right direction. And then she was mentioning how youth a lot of the time have phones. So something like an app or a website is really beneficial for them to like streamline access to resources. So maybe if StreetCloud could have like a physical presence and an app presence, that's something that could help younger people like between the age of 14 and 24 is like what they consider youth. And then she said one of their biggest issues connecting youth to resources is the communication between city agencies. Like there's the domestic violence one, and then the youth one, and then the transition one when you age out of the youth, and then the adult, and like women only, men only. But getting communication and connection between all those services is really hard, and getting all the resources from all those places on one page has been really hard for them. So streamlining that, which is one of our goals, is really key. And then she was also saying the real-time information about shelters or food banks or offerings of whatever benefit is really big, because maybe a shelter doesn't have a bed that night, and someone would show up and then not get a bed to sleep, or maybe like the volunteers at whatever church couldn't come that evening, so they're not holding the dinner that someone's expecting. So the real-time updates could be really beneficial for someone who's trying to go to a resource and wants to know if it's available and if it's worth it. Yeah, so having a place to find all of the information across all of the systems is really key, and that's something that's like one of our goals. And also getting the information from other systems. Like she said, some of the food banks have their own well-networked little group, but not everyone knows about their resources. So accessing those places that aren't like doing the best outreach and getting their information out too. And then she was saying New York has a thing called 311 where you can call and get like 24/7 operators and information, but they kind of lack in the area of quick solutions. It's maybe immediate help or immediate direction to help, but then not really long-term solutions. And I know Portland, we have 211, and our group has called that number before, and it's just not great. People don't answer the phone all hours of the day because they close when the office closes, and it's a little bit difficult to use. So maybe trying to look at 211 and their app could be something that could really make StreetCloud better if we like develop on top of an already developed platform. So that's an option, and that's kind of what the guy I met with yesterday, Danny, was saying, was to look at what we already have instead of maybe starting from scratch, building on top of something and making it better. And then she also commented on making it accessible for people with learning disabilities. Maybe they need an auditory option or visual impairments, or icons if they can't read, whatever. So super accessible, different languages. I'm just looking at my notes. And then another key part that she said would make it a lot better is hiring people with the lived experience, so they can give a firsthand insight of, would this be beneficial for someone, or how would they use this resource. So it's not just folks like myself who have houses and we don't use any of these resources, like trying to impose something on all of these people who are going to be using it. We really want their firsthand insight. So maybe that means like hiring people for like focus group things or for research, or for, a job related to the app itself or something like that. And then she was also commenting on having the dialogue start between houseless individuals about what services are good, what are bad, recommendations, things like that, and then getting the places to actually pay attention to those reviews. Like maybe their food is really, really terrible and no one knows it, but that's the only opportunity they have to get dinner that night, but they would like it to be not just peanut butter and jelly every day or whatever it is. And then, yeah, having dialogue about what are the good places to go to, so we're not just putting out like bad resources for people, like things that are actually useful and actually helpful. And part of this whole thing is to really give people a voice. There's kind of a difficult part between the housed and the houseless, and like we're speaking for them in a way because we have the voice, but if we really put it in their hands to give them the voice, that can be way more powerful coming from someone who is living outside. But that's obviously really difficult to do. And then we were talking about counting individuals who are living outside. They have a thing in New York called Street Smart, I think, and it's some sort of data analytics thing to capture how many houseless individuals they are, but obviously that's really hard to just count people, because how do you do that? Like, you go searching the streets and count numbers, or you count how many people are using city services, but how do you capture all the children who are, like, sleeping on friends' couches and relatives' couches? They're houseless, they don't have a steady place, and like temporary versus permanent situations, just how do you count all of those things? So the data is either really low on numbers or like overestimated high. So we're not getting like an accurate amount of how many people are in need of these resources and who's not being reached, because it's really just hard to count those individuals. And then she was talking specifically about LGBTQ plus youth. They have an extra hard time accessing resources. Maybe they had to get out of their foster care home, or their parents kicked them out of their like biological home because they don't accept their lifestyle or choices. She said some ridiculous number, like 75% of transgender youth are living outside because of family discord about their lifestyle of being transgender. So that's really, really unfortunate. So having specific resources for those types of kids, because they're in the transition age, like if you're under 18, you go into foster care, but then 18 to 21, you're kind of in transitional, and then when you hit 21, you completely get cut from any youth services, and then you go into like the real-time adult stuff, but that can be really dangerous. A 21-year-old of whatever race or sexual orientation now going into the big intake warehouse of tons of people who are older and scary and dangerous and whatnot. So yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and how, yeah, they get completely dropped at the age of 21. And she herself has worked on this streamlined process for youth to go from their shelter that they're already in as a youth into another little more permanent-ish shelter, as they're transitioning out of the age, so they don't get completely cut off when they don't have the resources to get to a next stage. And a big key thing is to make StreetCloud give job opportunities for people who have lived experience. Just like closing the circuit loop of who's working on StreetCloud and providing jobs for people that can help them, get a job to get off the street and whatnot. So that's a really key part of making it like sustainable along with our mission, which I think is a great idea. And that's something that Kaya with Street Roots mentioned at our gala presentation, is about employing people who are living outside. Um, and like specifically teenagers, even if they can get some sort of job, that would be really great for them if they're not in a great place. Working on something involved with this application that's not too hard, doesn't involve, like too much schooling or knowledge, stuff like that, but giving them some sort of job would be really helpful. And another aspect we discussed is just houseless prevention. That's not something that Street Cloud like is exactly trying to attack, but giving people access to resources like social workers, like mental health care, rehab, any other sort of resource they would need, um, government support, like, I don't know, welfare or some sort of payment or subsidized housing, so they don't lose their house to begin with, or so they don't lose their job, which then they couldn't pay for their house or their apartment. So working on kind of the prevention side is also a key part of it. She said this one question she asked someone or asked people all the time is what would have needed to happen to stop you from becoming homeless in the first place, or to stop you from getting in that whatever bad situation they're in. So if we ask people with that lived experience, what would they have needed in that moment? Did they need rehab? Did they need housing? Did they need a job just to have money? Did they need food or medical care so they could get healthier? Or did they need their family back in their life? Did they need domestic violence support? Whatever the tipping point was that led them to be living outside, if we kind of figure that out, we can kind of figure out how to target resources a little bit better from the prevention side. So that's really interesting to think about, but that would just come from data, from people giving us their information, which is a little more difficult when we're talking about people who are living outside and they're already very vulnerable. So capturing like very personal things like that, I feel like would be really hard, but it could be potentially done through individuals who are seeing social workers when they're like building their whole, case to get their possible opportunities and future support. Just collecting the data on how to stop someone from getting in that situation to begin with. Or another thing, like specifically with teenagers, she mentioned in like poorer households, when kids turn 18, like you're a legal adult, you can be kicked out of the house basically. So what would it take to like subsidize families to be able to keep their older children living with them? Like what amount of money literally would it take to keep people with their families, and not just, I guess, 18, 19, 20 to 24-year-olds living with their families, but anyone really, if they have a family member that can't totally support them, like could there be some sort of subsidizing program that could just keep people under a roof? That's a really interesting thing that I have not thought about, and I don't totally know where that money would come from. But yeah, and then we were talking a lot about trans folks and how they have way less opportunities, already very disadvantaged living outside. Like I mentioned, their families a lot of the time have kicked them out, and getting specific jobs can be really hard, and they're already very marginalized, so communicating with them is even more difficult because, they don't trust anyone because they've been let down so many times. So having specific services and access to job opportunities for trans individuals would be very beneficial to them, because a lot of those folks can't get traditional work, so they end up in like sex work and exploitation and obviously really bad things. So that is really horrible. So some sort of targeted services for just the whole array of people. And another important aspect about the user experience of a website or an application is for every single person using it to be able to identify themselves on the platform, whether that's by race or sexual orientation or gender or situation. Like, I am a white 20-year-old female from whatever background, fitting into whatever category. Or obviously being white, that's not the best example, but like a Latina transgender woman coming from this background. Like they want to make sure that the person who's using the service knows that it's meant for them. So if they see themselves represented in it, that's one way for everyone to know that, oh, this is a resource for me. They're including people like me in this, and they'll trust it more. And she mentioned the whole private sector versus public sector, like getting money. Um, Basically agreed that going to the government could be a good thing, having the city pay for it, or part of it, or allow us to implement it. Just working with the city could be huge because obviously they're trying to tackle this issue as well. So the city is a really good place to start, but we would probably only be able to pitch it to them once we had a prototype. The guy who I met yesterday, Danny, also mentioned this. If I could build a prototype and go to the city and say, can we do a 3-month like pilot practice with this, and like collect all the data we can during that time and see how it works out. That could be a potential, but we would have to get it off the ground before we got to that point. And then the last thing we discussed was the Link NYC stands that I talked about in my other video that already exist. And she said those are cool and it's good that people are using them. I told her they're finding that a lot more people are using them to access services like houseless individuals. But obviously, with the commercial aspect to it, it really creates this like, who is this made for thing, which makes it harder on me to decide how do I keep my revenue in coming into StreetCloud if it's not commercialized in some sort of way. So that's something that the Link NYC platforms are doing well, is they're for tourists. They have ads and sponsors, and that's where they're getting their money. So I'd have to think about how to maintain that, but also not scare off the people who I'm meaning to use this by all of these ads and commercialized things. Wanting to make sure people know that this is meant for them. So that was just kind of something to think about. So yeah, this is the card for Tracy. Like I said, at the Department of Youth and Community Development, and it was a really cool meeting. It lasted like almost a full hour, so that was great. Thanks.